Hello everyone, Andrew Martin here, and welcome to my BCM Game of the Month for October 2013, which comes direct from the European Youth Championships in Budva, Montenegro, where I'm acting as one of the English coaches. In fact, the game this month blends in with an article that I read by Thomas Rendell in last month's BCM, which focused on interesting variations of the French defence. So my game of the month is a fascinating French between international masters Johannes Afek playing white and Afek-Kuijf playing black. And this game was played in the Haarlem Open in August 2013. Now when you play the French, and especially the classical variation, you have to have a good defence prepared against the Alekhine Chatard attack. The move h4 here, where white deliberately sacrifices a pawn to open up kingside lines. Black has many responses against this particular attack. He can of course take this pawn. There's nothing especially wrong with bishop takes g5, h takes, and now queen takes g5. Although when you play this way, you have to be prepared to face two dangerous ideas. There's the traditional knight h3 in this position, and Johnny Hector, the fearless Swedish grandmaster, has also been experimenting with the interesting queen d3 in this position. In general, taking the pawn, if we return to h4, leads to a passive and durable position for black, where you have to defend for a long time before you can even hope to realise this extra pawn. So in general, French players, who are a pretty combative lot, tend to choose other ideas, such as a6 in this position, or even castles. Anyway, I was reading this article by Rendell where he gave a Russian game where black responded with h6, and I thought to myself, yes, that is a relatively simple way of solving all the problems that white is setting in this position. And there was this game where white went bishop takes e7, black recaptured with the queen, and then just carried on in typical French style. He played for c5, he played a6 first to stop knight b5, and got good counterplay against white's centre. Essentially, by playing this way, black's trying to throw the game back into a classical French, where the move h4 looks like a little bit of a waste of time. Going back to h6, there's also queen h5, which has been played. Again, black should probably respond to this classically with a move like c5. But we're going to focus on the move bishop e3, which is the move Afek played in this position, just retaining the bishop for attack and dropping back to support d4. And it's this move that gives h6 its sternest test. Well, certainly white should be aware that black can hit at the centre in typical French style. That's what Kuijf did. And now Afek brought his queen out to g4, which is the most critical way of playing. Now black can, in this position, answer the attack on g7 by playing king f8. We see this motif, however bad it looks, in many variations of the French, and it's motivated by the strong attack, the strong pressure that black is bringing to bear on white's centre. Essentially, black's hoping white's centre is going to collapse before white can get pressure against the black king position. White can certainly put the heat on here with ideas such as rook h3, rook f3, things like this. These ideas are borrowed from the McCutcheon variation. But in this game, Kuijf decided, as black can do in the McCutcheon in a similar type of position, to play g6, hoping that the roof doesn't cave in on the king side before the counterplay in the centre comes into focus. Well, Afek decided to take on c5, a very committal decision. Essentially, he's abandoning all ideas of maintaining his centre and just staking everything on piece play in the upcoming positions. Now, if you don't want to do that, then clearly you can try and bash through with h5 straight away. But I think black is too quick in this position, and he just takes on d4. If the bishop recaptures, we can now block with g5 and use the bishop as a target with knight to c6. This looks like a good type of French to me, with the bishop on d4 misplaced. Going back to g6, white can also try to castle on the queen side straight away. Black plays knight c6, white goes knight f3, and now after c takes d4, white reluctantly has to take with the bishop again. And then again we get a typical French after a6, king b1, and now queen c7. This looks comfortable to me, as long as h5 isn't going to blow black away, which I don't think it does. So after g6, going back to our featured game, we can see that Afek is already faced with a difficult decision, and that's why he decides to take on c5, and this allows black to take on e5, which Kuijf did. White dropped his queen back to g3, black brought the other knight out, and now white castled on the queen side. In the game Kostenjuk versus Huang Trang, which was played in Belgrade 2013, white decided to pin the knight after bishop b5, delaying castling for the time being, and black played bishop d7. White went bishop f4, black played bishop f6, and after knight ge2 we reached an interesting position where, as I say, white is depending almost exclusively on piece play to furnish the chances for him. I think black's best here is probably to get rid of that c5 pawn by playing b6. White takes, black chops back, and white's now got to make quite a big choice. Obviously, if she castles on the queen side, there's going to be plenty of counterplay. But in any event, whatever white does here, I think black is okay, and in fact can look forward to very good chances later on by mobilising the central pawns. Black went on to win that game in 40 moves. So just returning to Afek-Kuijf, white castled long. Black brought the knight back to d7, eyeing up the pawn on c5, and now white went in with knight b5, threatening knight c7. This looks like it might be quite an awkward move for Kuijf to meet, and clearly Afek was hoping to land a serious punch with knight b5. But Kuijf played very calmly. He played king f8, and white continued with his plan, knight to c7. Whether it was better to force g5 here or not is an open question. My own feeling is it was probably better to play this way, and then just delay putting the knight on d6 or c7 for the time being. Just settle for a move like king b1 and play on, with hopes of prizing open the king side soon with f4. Nevertheless, in the game, Afek had very aggressive intentions. He came in with knight c7, black played rook b8, and now white sacrificed a piece very boldly with knight takes e6. Not quite sure whether this is entirely sufficient, but I think you'll agree it is very, very tempting. I mean, when you see this sort of possibility in your own games, you think, yes, I'm going to do that, because it's very difficult to resist. Nevertheless, white did have some serious alternatives, one of which was development with knight e2, and if black plays knight f6, just put the knight on d4. And then again we get a typical French here, after bishop d7, bishop d3, knight takes d4, bishop takes d4, and now rook to c8, with interesting play. It's quite difficult for white to make capital of the black king position, and meanwhile white's pieces are a little bit awkwardly placed. That knight on c7 has got to maybe retreat now, and white is losing a bit of time. Unclear. Going back to rook b8, white can try bishop b5, and then I think a6 is a very interesting move. Not fearing knight takes a6 because of rook a8 with serious counterplay. And certainly after a6, going back, if white takes on c6 with the bishop, then again black is bound to have counterplay. White can put his knight on f3, black goes rook b7, and then the sack on e6 is similar to the game, but I think a bit worse for white, as black has bishop f6, bishop takes h6 check, takes, and now bishop g7. And white doesn't have time to take on e6 here, because b2 is hanging. So he's got to play queen f4, and black goes king g8. Again with very serious counterplay. Perhaps seeing all this, Afek elected to sacrifice straight away. Of course black took, white came in with the queen, and now bishop f6 again. But it's different this time, because black doesn't have pressure against b2. So this gives white time to play bishop takes h6 check. And rook takes h6 is different this time, because after queen takes h6 check, if black goes bishop g7, white can take on e6. So this way round, black's probably got to play king e7, and now check, king f8 and rook h3 gives white a dangerous attack. So going back to the game, Kuijf played king e7, challenging white to find compensation. Afek brought his bishop back to f4, and now in typical French style, again black offered a sacrifice with knight takes c5. Active piece play for black is now the order of the day. He's happy to give white the rook on b8. He's going to recapture, and now he's got pressure, potential pressure coming up against the white king with moves like queen b6, and there's also knight e4 in the offing with pressure against f2. White's got to be seriously careful here. He doesn't get battered to death on the dark squares. Well, in fact, that happens in the game, as Afek played knight f3, and Kuijf seized the opportunity to put his knight on e4. This has two ideas behind it. Number one, of course, it attacks f2. And number two, it slightly strands the white queen in the middle of black's camp. The queen can't come back to defend. So it's really awkward for white to defend that f2 pawn. In the game, Afek elected to try to, again, bash black flat here with bishop d3. He could have moved his rook to e1. Then I think the best move is knight d7 and maybe sack on e4, something like this. But it's not very convincing. White has, yes, 3 pawns for a piece, but black has many active chances. And, well, I presume he starts with a move like queen b6. So going back to the game, Afek plays bishop d3, maybe a mistake. Black takes on f2, rook f1, knight takes h1, and now here's the move on which white was banking his hopes. Knight to g5. It looks extraordinarily dangerous, but Kuijf defends resourcefully, as is typical of the French defence player. He goes into a self-pin with queen f8. And you see, by playing this way, white has no plan B. He's now a rook and a piece down, a rook and 2 pieces down, in fact. Sorry, 2 pieces down. Let me get the material count right, because it is slightly unusual. 2 pieces down. And I don't see a follow-up. Afek tried the plausible knight h7. But now again, a very cool and calculated defensive move. Queen to g7. And this scotches any further hopes white may have had of bashing through. I think it forces the exchange of queens in very favourable circumstances, and white runs out of steam. In the game, Afek tried queen takes g7. Not good enough. If he tried queen takes f6 check, and then knight takes f6, I think black can get away with a cool rook takes h4. And then there's a couple of checks for white, but nothing more. King to c7. Black emerges a piece up. But in the game it wasn't much better. White took on g7. Black recaptured. White took on h1. Knight came out to c6. There are only a couple more moves, as black has a clear piece extra for only a pawn. The centre starting to roll. And after bishop g6, e4, white resigned. So this is a game, and there have been quite a few games recently which seek to clarify the problems posed by the Alekhine-Chattard attack. If h6 is a simple and good reply, then black is very much in business against this system.